Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. So, my gentleman today came into my life in a very unique way. A close friend of mine, successful entrepreneur, sent me a copy of this book. He says, Charlie, I sent all my close friends this book. I sent all my clients this book. It's a book that has radically changed my life, and I feel like I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't send this book to you. So, it was such an endorsement. I grabbed the book, read the book, and it did make a radical impact in my life. Then, as luck would have it, I'm out in Costa Rica attending an event, and I decide, hey, I'm going to go to this meditation. I go to this meditation. Lo and behold, the author of this book is guiding the meditation. An incredible treat. And then I had the pleasure of having dinner with him later. I think it was that evening. We just bonded, had a great connection. And so it's really an honor to bring him to you today. Now, I've never done this before. I've actually never read the back of a book in front of this podcast. I've always just sort of explained it at a high level, but I feel like I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't actually read a quick blurb from the back of his book so you understand why I'm bringing him to you today. Here we go. Some people are born with a drive, often seen in entrepreneurs, pro athletes, inventors, adventurers, and Navy SEALs. It's in their DNA. Research has shown that certain genes can manifest resilient and highly focused people who can be impulsive and easily distracted. While these traits enabled our ancient ancestors to survive, if you have these traits today, it can create havoc in your life. You may be diagnosed with ADHD, as I am, ADD, or OCD. But what the world tells you is a disability or disorder may actually be your greatest gift. Now it's time to learn how to use it. So here to help is author Doug Brackmann. This is the book called Driven. And using his experience teaching the highly driven how to master their gift, Doug provides the insight, tools you need to master yours. We'll talk about how to stop self-sabotage forever and shame and doubt, find your wolf back, use meditation to put you on the right path, all this stuff to take control, harness a gift, get you on the life you always wanted. Doug, my man, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I don't think I've ever had that back of the book read on the beginning of a podcast for me. It sounds good though.
It does. I think one of the most fascinating things, first of all, in reading the book, I enjoyed it because in many ways I felt understood.
Yeah, I hear that often. Yeah, one of my favorite Amazons is that it's an uncomfortable, almost biography of me. The Drivens feel so unique, but then once you hear this, it's like, holy crap, somebody really does know my uniqueness. And it's been, I mean, I had no idea how many Drivens there were until I actually wrote the book.
Mm.
So it's, yeah, I always joke that I wrote the book because I really hate being alone. Just wanted to find other people like me. And it's the old joke I always say about psychology. If a psychologist ever tells you they didn't get into psychology to figure out their own shit, they're lying. So yeah, that's what I did. And I am driven. I am on top of the list driven. So
And define driven for the audience.
it's type A personality, type A plus personality. It's been called a whole bunch of different things, but it is really a transgenerational adaptation to a traumatizing environment is what I've come to conclude since writing the book. So it's really a generational way to survive when the world that you're born into really, really sucks. And so hunter-farmer theory is what I relied upon heavily in the book and just kind of make sense of it. But 10,000 years ago, the world was a really hard place to live.
Mm.
Saber-tooth tigers and, it was wild bands of people with big clubs banging the shit out of each other. So it was a very different place. The agricultural revolution, that just an aberration, over the last 10,000 years, the climate became very stable. And that allowed the human species to do this thing called farming. And so most, and I mean 95% of the humans on the planet and those born during this agricultural period adapted to a very sedentary, safe, boring world. And then these genetics, these resilient genes of the driven, probably 3, maybe 5, maybe even 6% of the population at the most. We are the ones waiting for the next ice age. We are the ones who are waiting for the world to go back into chaos and shit. We are the ones who will survive. We're all the farmers, all those that are adapted to a very predictable, safe world will very quickly panic and, run in circles and starve to death. We as entrepreneurs, we as the, kind of the resourceful, resilient, differently abled will succeed.
Are all founders considered driven?
Probably. So very simply, building off the hunter farmer theory, if you look at what a farmer is, they are really wired for a very linear, predictable world. What
Mhm.
worked last year, we're going to keep doing it this year because God did work last year, and they're very resistant to change. They're risk adverse. They feel like good enough is good enough.
Yeah.
Where the driven, the hunters, we're never satisfied. And, the genetics behind us and really our brain structure and, the understanding I've gained over the last 30 years, really in the last 10, really the last 5 since the functional MRI is just a miracle in being able to really see what's going on in real time in the human brain. So I've got a second edition coming out, revised, updated science, blah, blah, blah. And it's easiest to understand that we, same brain, same kind of parts of the brain, but our operating system. So
Mm.
most people are running DOS 2.0 and we got IS whatever 37. So our default modal network or the operating system of the brain is working 3 times as fast, connecting 4 times as many parts of the brain at the same time. And so we really have a different brain. We have a different operating system to go through this world. And so we are an adaptation to chaos. We are an adaptation to being able to solve very complex problems in real time.
Somebody explained this to me the other day, and I thought it was actually quite genius. They said the difference between somebody who's got ADHD or ADD versus somebody else's, we oftentimes think it's attention deficit disorder, but it's actually quite different. You get this overload of information. When you have ADD or ADHD, you're consuming so much information from every different direction out there that you actually have attention overload. It's more of an attention overload disorder. And that's why you look at those people who are often the most successful, they're able to solve problems that other people seemingly believed were impossible and do the things and find opportunities that other people overlooked because they were able to consume so much different information that they've got a different level of, if you want to call it experience.
We make use of the experiences we have much more effectively than most. And
Hmm.
so if you put most people in a functional MRI and thank God, there's a lot of money to be made in ADD and ADHD, particularly with the meds. So there's a ton of research on our brains. And you do these, you look at the meta-analysis, which they put together thousands of studies looking at tens of thousands of subjects. 95% of people, you put them in a functional MRI, they have this ball of energy in their left prefrontal. It's called the executive function. It is the executive, chief operating executive of the brain, and it's designed to tune out information.
Mm.
So it keeps the brain on track and it's only paying attention to things that are in line with what its belief systems are. And so, as driven people, we look at the world and like, how do these people believe the bullshit that they do with the narratives? And oh my God, why can't they see how ridiculous they are? It is most people really rely upon a thinking narrative to go through this world. And it is a linear, you think about a farmer, what keeps them alive is following rules and structures. And you put your finger in the ground, you put corn in it, and then you pat it and water it, patiently wait, you let it grow, then you harvest and you save a bunch of your harvest and you plant a little bit more and you're very conservative. And so they're literally going through the world as a series of sequential steps. You put us in a functional MRI and the back of our heads light up. And so our eyeballs are the thing that steer us through this world. And so if you're driven and you walk into a bar and it's like, how do we see the 37 things in that one check that's standing out? And we can attract, we track so many different targets at the same time. byproduct of this occipital dominance is, the frontal lobe then it's something called hypofrontality. So it's, in compared to this big ball of energy of executive function, we have little dots of activity on both left and right hemispheres. And so
Wow.
we're designed to really, track. And so the typical brain can track 3 to 7, kind of the maximum things, with people executive functions. We're tracking 9 to 13. So we literally can look at twice as many things. Most importantly, we're not seeing things. This is why, if you're driven, our sense of time is so wonky because we're not seeing things in this order. We're seeing things in this. We see it all at the same time.
Mm.
So we can draw these lines and make connections of things that, farmers, people with this executive function look at us like, how the hell do you see that? And it's like, I can't believe you don't. And so it's literally just two different brains and it's two different adaptations to, different environments. And so we're wired for chaos and threat, and they're wired for predictability and stability and safety.
So I'm going to tell you a little part of me, and I'm actually interested to see if this is common among the driven or not. This is the first time I've ever publicly shared this. So, believe it or not, I have lost my carry on 6 times in my travel. Twice it was going through security. I put it on the little conveyor belt and then I walked through and I just kept going and never went back to get it. I just didn't even think about it. Another time I just, was sitting there, I was thinking, I let go for a second and I walked off and there it goes. I've left it on the trains, on the airport, you go on this little train, you go from one to the other, and I've left my computer behind on the airplane itself and walked off. My wife thinks that I have to be a lunatic. Like, that's just crazy. But I tell her that once I start thinking about something and I get in this zone, it's just that I get in this zone and my body takes over an autopilot and I just am just running through things in my mind. And then it's sort of I wake up out of that zone. I'm like, how did I get here and where's my stuff?
Right. And that's one of the best predictors of guys that can make it through buds training or, the Navy SEAL training is this thing called neuropeptide Y. In ADD, ADHD land, it's called hyperfocus. And so the capacity to really become present and hyper focused on just what's happening in the present moment or in our immediate surroundings. And it's an adaptation for hunters. And so it gets us in a lot of trouble because it resets the central nervous system and washes away the consequences of something that just happened. So you're chasing a rabbit, the rabbit gets away, and you go, oh shit. Immediately it looks for another rabbit. Once another rabbit is spotted, the loss, the consequence, the problem with what just happened is gone. That's why 9,999 different ways to not make a light bulb. And we just keep going. And so misapplied is I have two I actually left my carry on at a getting by in water or something and then walked off and all of a sudden, I mean, it was big security and oh my God, Doug Brackmann, we found your bag. They thought it was a bomb in it. But it is that, it literally, I am not thinking about reality. I am in my own reality, in a present reality that I'm just kind of floating through. And yes, it makes you look crazy, but it is a huge benefit because you get into locked in the zone like that. Particularly if you're looking at a big spreadsheet or something in your business, you can look in all of a sudden the answer just seems to come to you. And it's
Right.
a very interesting space. Yeah. And time seems to get very different when you're in that zone. It's a flow and we are designed
Oh,
for flow.
I
Yeah.
was
So
asked a question one time. They said, you know, if God came down and asked you, would you want your children to have the same learning disabilities that you have or not? What would you say? And I said, honestly, and I'm not saying this to sound, crazy or whatnot, but I find this to be my superpower. I would
yeah.
absolutely want my children to have the same ones. And granted, in a conventional learning environment in school, it was hard. I couldn't learn anything the same way the kids did. I actually couldn't learn anything in school. It was after school. I'd have to have my book and I always write things with different colors. In fact, if you look at just your book, I have pictures drawn in the margins. I have, there's a difference between a straight line and a squiggly line, or I'll box it or circle it, but I'll remember, okay, it's on the left-hand side of the page, it's near the top. I drew a triangle next to the paragraph. Oh, this is what I'm looking for. Well, so that's hard at a conventional level. On another side, there's a reason why I've been able to achieve a certain level of success for our clients that others can't, simply because my brain doesn't work the same way that other
Right.
people's.
Henry Ford, God bless him, was one of the major influences in our school system. And he was literally, how do we train people for assembly line work? And you sit them in desks and you have them sit quietly for 90 minutes, and then you change subjects and you do this and you do this. It is a nightmare for the driven brain.
And it didn't the pirates actually, even before Henry Ford, the pirates, I think that was their way of actually exhibiting control over
Yeah.
humans.
And so it is, and I have such FOMO, which we can talk about that too. FOMO and imposter syndrome is something we are plagued with as drivens, that I'm so scared that I was full of shit and just made this up, that I, really came up with a true psychologically validated assessment for what it means to be driven. And we are different. There truly is a difference between us and about 95% of the rest of the world. It is real.
Is
And
there correlation between being driven and then being successful? And I'm talking more so professionally or in business.
as we were talking before we jumped on the podcast, I just spent the day yesterday in prison speaking to 100 maximum security prisoners in Houston, Texas. Amazing day. But 80% of the people in that room were driven.
Hmm.
We are ADD, ADHD, and we have an issue with following rules. We have an issue with, and that's my joke, I am unemployable. And most of the people I work with are also unemployable. I work well with others. I do not work for others.
Yeah, I get that.
And so it's this very strong sense of individualism combined with this, kind of ability to see through bullshit. I mean, we hate hypocrisy. We hate this double standard because we see right through it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I always say. If we're not, and these are the addictive genetics, when I first entered grad school, the dopamine DR, dopamine receptor number 2, A1 allele gene, 1991, High Magazine came out with this article. Oh my God, we found the alcoholism gene. 30 years ago, we didn't really understand genetics the way we do now. Is it nature versus nurture was always the question. Is it in your genes or is it shaped by your environment? That question is gone. The answer
Yeah.
is yes, because of epigenetics. And so epigenetics means that our genetics are actually expressed depending upon the environmental conditions that we're in. And so in the environmental condition of chaos, and I could have called the book the shame-based personality type, because we have this very deep sense that we're broken. We have this very deep sense that there's something wrong with us. And we feel that way. And that feeling is really boredom. Boredom is this lack of dopamine in this very specific part of the brain that makes us feel like there's something missing or wrong in the present moment. And it's like, "Ugh, I need to do something, I need to change." And if you were a farmer and you feel that, you would get away from your crops. If you're a hunter and you don't feel that, you would be lazy in the cave. So it's a huge adaptation. So it motivates us to keep going and keep doing this, behaving. But the shame, this biggest difference that I see, and I'll get back to your question about success or not. If you have a very strong executive function part of the brain, and if you think about how we went from these hunter-gatherer groups of little entrepreneurs and drivens into these massive societies, their identity, the farmer's identity, most people's identity on this planet is very simple and linear. They're butchers and bakers and candlestick makers.
Well, that focus on you got to have work-life balance, right?
Yeah,
It's the same people
yeah,
that
and
focus in on
that
that. Everything has to be, right? Am I right?
they get, 2 hours of work, they get a 10-minute break, and after 4 hours of work, they get a 40-minute lunch, and they love that predictability, and they love the 3% growth in their paychecks, and where for us, that makes us feel trapped, makes us
Oh,
feel like
yeah.
we're in hell.
Yeah.
And, the shame-based and, people who have our brains, that's my joke I always say, you wanna send a driven person to hell, ask them to figure out who they are. Because what do you mean who? Like what I do or like who I am? Like it doesn't even stick to us. It's kind of this odd
Yeah.
kind of question, but we still need an identity. And so the most consistent thing in the driven person's world is this feeling of not enough. I could have called it the shame-based personality type, but I never would have sold the book. Um,
Well, and
but it
maybe
is
that's the part of the driven brain that it's like I'm fighting against that label. Whether or not that's true, I'm going to push up against it because I don't want to be connected with that word. Instead, I'd rather say, okay, not good enough. I can spin that into a positive.
right. And it is, you want to make a driven person crazy, is accuse them of being bad or wrong and no
Yeah.
opportunity to explain yourself.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care you're bad. And it's like, it triggers this deep well of feeling like we don't belong.
The
And so
biggest
it
trigger
is,
you can give me is to tell me that it can't be done or it won't be done. That will send me through the freaking roof.
and I will prove that you're wrong. So
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
we'll work ourselves to death to prove it. But it just depends on what your addictions are. And
Yeah.
these are the addictive genetics. And so this, if you're addicted to drugs, alcohol, cocaine, or whatever, you're probably going to wind up in prison.
Yeah.
If you're addicted to work and, working out and everything else, you might become a Navy SEAL or a founder.
Yeah.
And, the addictions are that's, if you're not screwed up in, negative addictions, we're 5% of the world's population, but we own 80 or 90% of the shit in the world.
Yeah.
And so we're hyper successful. As I always joke, and I get into this, balanced life is bullshit. You will never have a balanced life. Balancing is the point. And so finance, romance, and health are three basic life
Yeah.
categories. The wheel of life that they use in EO or YPO, and that's 11. In the book, I use the six: friends, family, fitness, finance, fun, faith. There's a bunch of different ways to slice your life. But drivens are famous to have one of those categories. My finances are great, my marriage is okay, I'm fat and overweight. It's so that sabotage. That's the other thing that drivens are just famous for. And we build a wonderful life up, we get it all together, and then we blow it up. I go into depth in the book about how we do that. And that was actually my doctoral dissertation was self-sabotage and self-fulfilling prophecy. So it is imperative that as a driven, you really start to understand how human biology operates that. We're prone to it, but you can stop it and actually catch it before you blow up your life.
It was interesting because I was at an event several years ago, and Tom Brady from the Patriots, he flew in on his helicopter, and he lands, walks up on stage, and right beforehand, the conversation was about work-life balance, and so the question came to Tom Brady, what is your feeling on work-life balance? And he looked all bewildered and he said, work life balance is a myth that's perpetrated by average people. If you want to be the best, you have to be willing to throw your life out of balance. And so he was asked to explain it. And it was exactly what you said. He said, if you want to be the best, you only have room to focus in on three things. And he says, for me, it's football. So that would be his finance, right?
Yeah.
His family, which you can call it his romance, and then health. And he's like, that's it for me. He goes, there's a reason why I'm not out there partying with friends. I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. If I try to do more than three, then one of those three core ends up failing. And interestingly enough, my son, who's now 18 years old, I believe he's a driven. He's training to be a professional race car driver. He's out in Orlando right now training. And he asked me if we could go for a walk. And as we're going for a walk, he's like, Dad, I don't know if I'm doing something right or wrong. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, I look around at my friends, they all have a lot of friends. They're all going out, they're doing everything and this and that. and I'm starting to feel a little lonely. And I said, why? He said, I know everybody keeps talking about work life balance, but I don't have time to do work life balance. I'm trying to be a professional race car driver. And so I have to train and then I have to work out and make sure that, I'm strong and can, maintain what goes on there. And then I like to spend time with my family and I want to spend time with you guys. And he's like, there's no time for anything else. And I feel like I'm doing something wrong. And I had to share, very similar to what we're talking about in our conversation, that you're not doing something wrong. If you look at the peak of a mountain, how many people can actually stand on the peak of a mountain? Not very many, right?
It is, yeah. And then my youngest is definitely driven. She's literally turning 16 in a couple of weeks. When she was 4 years old, just turning 5, she was the first one, little tiny bunchkin of a in tumbling class. She was the first one to the 12-foot tall rope.
Mm,
And did you see the little monkey running up? But that feeling like you're always doing something wrong
yeah.
is what really got to buffer that. You're not your feelings, and feelings are not facts. It's
Hmm.
just a feeling. You see what you feel. And so it's really important, if you feel like there's something missing or wrong and you look at your life, you'll find it.
Yeah.
And it's confirmation bias, and you're getting stuck in these loops where meditation and the style of meditation, I'll, say it very directly, 95% of meditations are created by farmers for farmers, and they make us batshit crazy. They do not work for us. They make us nuts and makes us want to throw things against the wall. You know, close your eyes and imagine a green field, and all of a sudden I got naked chicks and pizza and everything. Because our brains are literally designed to multi-think.
Yeah.
They're not designed to focus in on one thing.
Yeah.
And so the other thing is, if you close your eyes and, as a driven, particularly, if you're coming from some kind of chaotic environment, chaotic childhood, usually one of our parents were driven. So we're coming from addicted personalities or some kind of chaos as kids, if not outright trauma. Your eyes are your threat detectors.
Hmm.
So I'm going to close my eyes and try to relax. And it's like, no, for number one, and I do this, you taught, I don't know how many hundreds of Navy SEALs to meditate. Oh, I hate meditation. Just say, you don't understand what it is. Meditation is about focusing on the present.
Yeah.
It's not about relaxing. And so it is this intense focus, hyper focus on the present that allows the drivens to really understand the power of what it means to be driven. We have an unbelievable brain, a remarkable problem solver. But, most of us are solving, emotional problems, which feelings are not problems to solve. And so we're just wasting our energy. Once you understand the basic framework for how I present identity in the book and really start to harness what we
Yeah.
are remarkable, but we're also very self-destructive. And most importantly, it is a farmer's world. It is their world. Trying to get them to fit into our world, and God forbid try to scale a company, you got 100 employees and 95% of them, you better have a whole bunch of farmers in it because they're the ones who actually do the work and show up on time. It really helps to understand that you're not them and they're not us.
So now for our listeners that are saying, you know what, I think I actually do resonate with this being driven. Is there anything actionable that they can take away from this or something that can help them harness this idea of now I'm driven. How do I become better, a better driven, so to speak?
The most important takeaway, and this is what I really got into, talking to a bunch of prisoners yesterday about, you're not your feelings. Driven's that, I feel like I'm always not enough. I feel like this is this. And if you use that feeling as a way of driving your behavior, yeah, you can get a lot of things done, but you're
Mhm.
also wasting your time
Yeah.
because you're trying to get rid of this feeling, and if only thinking we're way just ridiculously prone to that. If I finally sell my company, then I can relax. And that if
Yeah.
then, It's this other genetic, the dopamine receptor number 4. It's the FOMO gene or the grass is greener gene. And farmers really feel like what they have is good enough.
Yeah.
And hunters, we never feel like it's good enough. And we are wired to feel like there's more woolly mammoths over the next hill.
Yeah.
And so, farmers, no, this is great. It's like, no, come on, let's go. But because we believe that's better, we often mistakenly assume that this kind of sucks.
Do you sometimes envy the farmer's ability to be content almost?
Yes, at times. But then
Yeah.
the benefits, I love being driven. Once you understand that, driven is a gift, but you really have to understand the things I need, because I'm a recovering addict and, I can get addicted to things very easily. Anything that gives me a dopaminergic charge.
Yeah.
And so I always, joke that honor your addictions and, choose your addictions wisely and put guardrails around them. And bow fishing, I do a lot of crazy stuff and guns and everything else, which, when I get into something, if it gives me a dopaminergic charge, I really get good at it. Inch wide, mile deep. Um,
Sure. I get that.
and I have those spread out, in different areas of my life, and neurochemistry, neurobiology is one of them. But I know I'm going to go deep for 2 weeks and get burned out on it. And I'm done.
Yeah.
Then I can jump to guns for 2 weeks. Then I can just as I go around the circle, getting better and better and better at all of these things. And that is, kaizen is the Japanese term for it, or mastery.
Yeah.
Once, better has no finish line. And that is the thing that drivens need. And, what does better mean anyway? Better's not a feeling.
When I speak to drivens, and most of my clients happen to be of this driven mentality. There's a difference between a happy driven and a sad driven based on if we look at the activities that they are spending in their day. And some of the advice that I tell them is like, in many cases they're like, I think I'm bored and blah blah. I want to sell my business or I don't like it. And I'm like, here's the thing. There are things in your business that give you energy. There are things in your business that suck the energy out of you. And as CEOs and as founders, we're creators, we're builders, and so we're visionaries. But if you're stuck doing client delivery, if you're stuck putting out fires, and that's not what you're made for. You're made
Exactly.
for being, that visionary. So you got to spend more time doing the things that give you energy, less time and delegate out the stuff that sucks the energy away. And that in and of itself is what's going to help you, be productive. And I think just knowing that being a driven, yes, like you mentioned this earlier, the farmers are the executors.
Yeah, the visionary, which I talk a lot. I know Gino Workman's actually a really good friend. The visionary versus the implementer or integrator, but it is the right hemisphere driven. Meaning the right hemisphere of the brain is the emotional, three-dimensional. And as Carl Jung was very clear on, we have a dominant left or right. And so, just like your handedness, right hand versus left hand doesn't mean you can't use the other. It just means you have a dominant. And so dominant drivens that have the right hemisphere are the visionaries. And we are impassioned and emotional and loving. We can sell anything. Where the left hemisphere drivens are much more the linear and the logical, and they can get shit done. That's been the last really 5 years of my life. Finding matches between, a founder and the number two, the CEO and, the
Yeah.
founder and the COO. And if they can understand how valuable they are to each other and not kill each other, it is a phenomenal pairing.
Yeah, for sure.
But once you pass it off to the farmers, and that's the thing I always teach all my clients, you cannot scale a hunting organization.
Yeah.
Meaning that, hunting organization, oh, we're going to get the next big deal. We're going to find this big thing. And then once we kill the woolly mammoth, we'll figure out how to clean it. We got the deal. Holy shit. And then but that's almost impossible to scale. You can only scale a farm. But as
Yep.
a driven, you cannot run a farm. You do not want to be in there. You do not want to be micromanaging all that. How deep to put the seeds. That's not your business.
Drivens tend to have a hard time letting go of things.
If you take anything from this podcast, this is the most important thing for drivens, particularly founders, when they're trying to let things go. Good enough is not a feeling.
Mhm.
Good enough is reality. So good enough KPIs and numbers and, 80, and that's the 80-20 rule. It takes you 20% of the time to get something 80% there, and then 80% more time to get the last 20 when 75 was good enough. What the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you teach your farmers, what is good enough, and you set that as a standard, and, then you got to let it go. It will never feel like it's good enough, or you will always see things. Well, I can make it better. Do you need to?
So let me ask you one final question because I know we're pushing up against the clock here. My favorite question to ask my guests. This is the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. What would your biggest, best tip be for our listeners who want to take their business beyond seven figures?
Stop worrying about money. Drivens in particular are always looking for measures of success.
Hmm.
And if you're focused on the money in particular and not on the system itself that is producing the money, you
Hmm.
miss the bigger picture. And so the guys that I work with in particular, I pair it up with the way I teach meditation. And so I teach meditation at gunpoint. And to get these drivens to calm down, I paired long range shooting. And I'm a long range competitive shooter, and so I take these guys out. And we shoot 300 to we shoot out to a mile. I mean, I shoot to 1,700 yards. But how do you hit a target at 300 yards, 500 yards, 600 yards? Exactly the same way. You follow a simple process, but it's
Hmm.
optimizing the processes that produce the money. Rather than focusing on the money, you don't focus on the result. You focus on the processes that get you to the result.
Mm.
And so just because a target's at 300 yards versus 1,000, it's the same process. It just takes more refinement. You got to get better and better and better at the process that is making you that. And it's the old, well, I want to win the Super Bowl. No, you want to figure out how to make a Super Bowl winning team,
Yeah.
and then you can win 10 Super Bowls. And so it's the process of building that team. It's not the team itself. It seems like a nuance, but it is a huge shift in a driven's brain
I
because you
like
start
that.
worrying about the outcome and you focus on what's going to get me to that outcome.
I
And
like that.
particularly with our brain, we start to focus on the things that matter.
That's awesome, man.
You want to find me, it's iamdriven.com. You get onto that, and there's an assessment. Spent a year developing this thing, and I sent it out to a nationally norming agency. So I looked at the national average for what it is to take this assessment, and then it gives a very nice diagram to how you in relation to the average. It's the 10 basic qualities or traits that we tend to vary on.
And so we've talked a lot about your book, Driven, which they can get on Amazon and all the
Yep.
big booksellers. But there's another one coming out. When can we expect to see that?
So a couple of books are coming. The next book is this book was written to drivens. The next book is about drivens in society. I think it's a really, farmers do not adapt well to change.
Yeah.
And so the internet, AI in particular, the world is rapidly changing.
Hmm.
And so the importance of entrepreneurship and the importance of drivens, particularly, to see through the systems and the processes that are screwing the sheep. I mean, literally, the guys running big pharma and the guys running big food, they're drivens. They're just addicted to other things. And so, there needs to be other drivens that come along and actually call bullshit on them and come up with a better system to protect the sheep. So it's
Yeah.
really about the dynamic of what's happening in the world right now. It's interesting. And then immediately following that, we're mostly through a updated science version, revised version, driven second edition. And
Awesome.
so, yeah, in the last 5 years, there's been a lot of cool research that has come out.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to it. All right. So that wraps up today's episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. We covered a lot. And hopefully, if you're listening to this, you understand a little bit more about yourself. Maybe you thought you were a little different than everybody else. And maybe you are driven. Take the assessment and find out. And then, it's not that one person or one type is better than another. As Doug mentioned, you want to scale your business, you can't scale it just with drivens. You need farmers too. And
But yeah, if you hire drivens, they come in and steal your stuff and start their own company. So I mean,
yeah,
it's seriously, and so it's yeah, you need to learn to work well with those that are not driven.
together you can create something really, really amazing. So again, that's iamdriven.com. Make sure you visit Doug's website, pick up the book Driven. I've read it and it's a phenomenal book. It really has made a huge impact in my life. I understand why Ben is sending it to all his clients and his friends. It's a big deal. And also, if you're looking for more tips, strategies, and information to grow your business faster, more predictably, and less dependent on you, also check us out at predictableprofits.com. Again, that's predictableprofits.com. This is Charles Gadet with my friend Doug Brackmann, and I will see you in another episode.